What's happening, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Deckard Unicorn. My name's Martin.
And my name's Shonagh.
And this is the first Deckard Unicorn episode of 2021. It's like the Twilight Zone.
It feels a little bit like it. Yeah. So yeah, here we are not 2 weeks into the new year and already 2021 has proved to be challenging.
Yes, it's thrown a few curveballs already.
Definitely. So Martin, any advice for how we might deal with the problems of 2021?
Strike first, strike hard, no mercy, sir!
It's
the only way to deal with it.
If you didn't get it from that, we don't know you. So clearly, this week's podcast is about the 1984 classic Karate Kid.
This is it. This is the end of the line.
Telling me.
Did I tell you about the pool here?
For Daniel LaRusso,
Is this the only pool you guys got?
the future seemed far from terrific.
This place is a dump. You should go back to New Jersey.
So directed by John G. Avildsen, famous for doing Rocky beforehand. And essentially it's just Rocky,
For kids.
but with teenagers and
Yeah,
karate
like-
with the boxing. Released in summer in 1984, and it stars Ralph Macchio as Daniel, the eponymous Karate Kid. You've got Pat Morita, Noriyuki Pat Morita, he plays Mr. Miyagi. John Kreese is played by Martin Kove. Elizabeth Shue plays Ali with an I, one of Daniel's love interest. You have William Zabka playing Johnny Lawrence, who's the big bad bully, makes Daniel's life very difficult. And you've got a bunch of other people as well, which we'll get to later on. So
They don't matter.
They don't matter at this point. Essentially, the story is that Daniel and his mum, they move from New Jersey, I think it is. From. They move over to California. His mum's moving for work, and Daniel's reluctant to leave his friends, but he goes nonetheless and struggles to settle in. You know, finds some friends initially, but then gets into a fight on a beach when he falls for Ali. But he's soon beaten up by Johnny, the local bully.
The local karate bully and his Cobra Kais.
Yeah,
I love the way they use that as like a plural term, like a collective term.
Yes.
Cobra Kais.
A group of Cobra Kai are Cobra
A
Kais.
gaggle of Kais.
Thankfully, he gets help from Mr. Miyagi, the local. He's their kind of like, what do you call it, your handyman?
Yeah, like the
Fixer.
fixer-upper. What's
Fixer-upper.
the word for it?
The
Like
DIY guy.
The Janny.
The Janny, yes. Exactly.
So in Glasgow, the janitor of your school is the custodian. Custodian? Is that the word people use?
Kind of, I suppose.
So yeah, in Glasgow, you would talk about the Janny.
Yes.
So-
the Janny's a fanny.
So Pat's the Janny.
Yep, Pat Morita is the Janny. So Mr. Miyagi takes Daniel under his wing, kind of reluctantly at first, teaches him karate, but, you know, Daniel doesn't really trust it at first, thinks he's been taken for a ride because he gets lots of odd jobs
of
to do around
chores.
times. But it turns out he's been surreptitiously learning karate through muscle memory.
Which is just as well because he's got the scrawniest little arms I've ever seen on a human boy.
He certainly has. It's all technique though, no strength.
Absolutely.
No strength required here. Ultimately, he beats the bad guys in the All Valley tournament. Which
Spoiler. So if you haven't listened to our podcast before, they're basically one giant spoiler.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Hey, I know it's hard, but we're not quitters, are we?
Yeah, so as we said at the beginning, the film was directed by John G. Avildsen, and he doesn't have much. When you look back at his sort of filmography, there's not much that he stands out for apart from Rocky, which he won an Oscar for, and also this, which is essentially, as we said, the same film. Just through a slightly different lens, through the lens of martial arts. Well, I suppose boxing's a martial art, but you know what I mean, the more kind of classical image of martial arts, karate and stuff. So I think the writer, Robert Mark Kamen, had a bit of personal experience to draw upon here. So
Yeah.
I think he was bullied as a kid. Is that
He
right?
was, yeah, and he was actually beaten up.
Yeah.
And following that, he decided to learn martial arts to
Yeah.
be able to defend himself. And actually, it's a really cool story. He started to learn, and then he realised that he didn't like the teachings of his master, his teacher.
Yep. Oh, that's familiar.
Exactly. So he felt that the teachings of the dojo that he was learning from were too aggressive, and the core values were based around violence
Yeah.
and attack, and that wasn't something that he felt was right for him.
Right.
So he sought out an alternative, and he actually started to learn a style of karate that came from Okinawa.
Yeah. Goju-Ryu, I think it is.
I
It's
believe
based on,
so,
yeah,
yep,
that's right.
uh-huh.
So there's a whole bunch of forms of karate, but Goju-Ryu is one of those sort of lesser known ones. I think most people in this country would know Shotokan karate. That's most schools are that, and people may be aware of Kyokushin karate, which is a more sort of full contact version. But yeah, Goju-Ryu, and there's Shito-Ryu as well, and a couple of others. Yeah, it's one of the lesser known ones, and I think that was from Okinawa itself.
Yeah, and I believe it was actually Miyagi-sensei who kind of founded that style or,
Right,
or
okay.
developed that style, and it was based on some principles that also came from China. So
Yep.
some of that detail in the film is actually quite accurate.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's well known that that's where most martial art came from China, and they take a different form. Again, we are taiko groups, so we know what that's like. You have different forms of music and art, and they go different places and they become slightly different things. But they've all got the same root, the same idea, but people put their own spin on it.
Until he met the right girl.
She's beautiful. I say she's beautiful. I think she's beautiful.
Is that your address?
You got it.
The title role is played by Ralph Macchio, who was quite young in this and still looks pretty much the same age now. I think the guy doesn't age. Like, he's almost in his 60s, and you would probably say he looks like he's in his 30s.
He looks
or
in
his
his
40s.
30s, yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, he's just got that gene, I think. But yeah, he got the part of Daniel, and I think he was famous really for The Outsiders the year before.
Yep.
So he was in a Francis Ford Coppola movie. It wasn't one of Coppola's best, I don't think, but I really enjoy it. I really like it. I like The Outsiders and I like Rumblefish. They're very, very similar. But yeah, he was good in that. He was just a young kid in it, and he's kind of on the fringes of that film as well. He's actually an outsider in The Outsiders.
And now, yeah, we consider him to be the Karate Kid. Like, he has embodied that role.
Yeah.
But do you want to hear some of the people who were considered for it?
Oh, I love these. Go for
This
it.
is like my favourite bit. Right. Sean Penn.
Oh yeah, I can understand that.
Can see it. Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, again, he was the right age,
Uh-huh.
but I think Robert Downey Jr. has always been like a wee cheeky looking
Exactly. I think he wouldn't have the respect thing, although maybe he could have turned it around.
Well, that's the
quite
thing.
well.
You could have believed he would be snarky,
Yeah.
and you could see why he would get bullied.
Definitely.
But I couldn't believe a turn
No,
to
I don't
someone
think
being
so.
humble. I mean, I think it's just because of the kind of characters
The
he's
Iron
portrayed.
Man characters,
Yeah,
especially.
he's never been anybody that's not been an arsehole.
Exactly.
In some respect. And
He's always been a smarmy git who just is jammy. He doesn't have to work for it, I feel.
Yeah. So
Charlie Sheen.
yeah, again, I can see it. Like these were people that were all either in The Outsiders or around that time.
Yeah,
they're all the same
exactly.
group.
And it's similar sort of, so Emilio Estevez, Nicolas Cage, Tom Cruise and Eric Stoltz. So I guess Eric Stoltz is maybe the only one that's...
Eric Stoltz would have been the one you would believe most, as far as, someone being bullied and then being humble enough to sort of knuckle down and work. I think he's great in Mask, which must have been around this time somewhere. But yeah, I think he'd have been really good actually. But I think Ralph Macchio, he's perfectly cast and he's got all the chops. And it's surprising because we talked about this last night. His acting in it is just incredible.
It's really good.
But we'll get to that when we talk about the actual characters.
And interestingly as well, the character was originally called Daniel Weber, although there's only one B in this, so I don't know if that's Weber, but apparently as soon as Ralph was cast, it became LaRusso.
I think it fits with the character, simply because his character has clearly got an Italian-American background, and I think he is an Italian-American as well, Ralph Macchio, so yeah, it fits it.
In one man, he found a teacher
I promise teach karate.
and a friend.
Fighting always last answer.
So the Karate Kid's legendary sensei is of course played by Pat Morita.
Yep, Noriyuki Pat Morita, yes.
Yep, who took his name, I think, from conversations with a Catholic priest when he was a child, who joked that when he converted him to Catholicism, he would call him Patrick.
Oh, I see.
So apparently that was his stage name.
Right. He got more work that way, and I think it was Jerry Weintraub, one of the producers, that said to him, you should start using your own name. In the early days of the industry, I think it was more difficult for people of colour and people of different ethnic backgrounds to get work. Like we've talked about before in other podcasts, a lot of the time, especially Asian people would have been cast as just white people with makeup, that kind of thing, put on a fake accent. And it was very difficult for them to get work. So I think working as a comedian and everything, an easy to remember name or an English or Western sounding name would maybe draw more people.
Pat was originally rejected when he applied for the part. The studio didn't want him because they associated him with being a stand-up comedian, and from his role in was it the Brady Bunch?
I think he was in Happy Days.
Sorry, it was Happy Days. I don't know where you got the Brady Bunch from.
Yeah, he was in Happy Days and a few other like sitcom type deals. I remember that when I was a kid. I think it was only after I'd seen The Karate Kid that I remembered it was Arnold. Like, oh, that's Arnold from Happy Days. I didn't know who he was at the time. He was the owner of the restaurant in Happy Days.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise that.
Yeah.
Because he's quite a different look in Karate Kid, doesn't he?
He does a wee bit, yeah. I think longer hair, a beard and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of instantly recognisable though.
Yeah. So yeah, apparently he went away, grew a beard, not actually purposefully for this role. He was back in Hawaii, kind of not out of work, but not, not thriving. And he'd kind of grown his hair, grown a beard, and then he'd gone back to his agent in New York to re-sign his contract with this kind of new look. And at that point, that's when he was then considered to audition. And he made a kind of accent pattern that was similar to his uncle's.
Yeah.
So although he had an American accent himself, he put this accent on, developed this accent, and then after quite a number of auditions was successful.
He auditioned 5 times apparently, so...
Yeah, I think the studio originally wanted...
it's Toshiro Mifune they wanted, yeah.
From Seven Samurai.
Yeah, that's ambitious. He was Japan's greatest actor probably, and he's probably still one of Japan's most well-known actors. He's in some of the most classic Japanese cinema you could ever wish to see. Yojimbo, Seven Samurai, Rashomon, Throne of Blood. Yeah, he's in...
Come and star
much...
in this film about a kid who learns karate in the valley.
Yeah, I mean, he was in other American films as well, films that were done in a kind of collaboration with American companies and stuff like that. But that was ambitious, and I think maybe possibly the language barrier might have been a problem.
So he didn't speak English.
Yeah, so Mifune had no need to speak English at that point. He was big enough star in Japan. I think he maybe wanted to be in American films. He was in, do you remember 1941, the Steven Spielberg movie? He was the submarine commander. Oh, I think he was in Tora as well.
Ah, okay.
But again, they were all roles where he was playing a Japanese man or a Japanese soldier, so he was never really required to speak English. So that in this part would obviously have required him to speak English fairly well and understand it fairly well. But I think because you had no language barrier, you get a great rapport and great chemistry between Noriyuki Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio. So yeah, I think it was the right choice in the end up. But he had to do 5 auditions. They wanted to see him in different context. And I watched some of the audition tapes, and he said that he put on that accent more because Miyagi was so tired.
I saw that
it's kind of like, Miyagi's so tired.
He was so fed up because they made him audition in costume, and then they made him audition with Ralph, and then but it paid off, and apparently eventually he got an apology that they hadn't.
Yeah, well that's it. Jerry Weintraub actually came back to him and said, I'm sorry, we nearly made a massive mistake by not choosing you, but this is going to turn out great. And of course he got nominated for an Oscar.
Exactly, for Best Supporting Actor.
So yeah, it was a great casting. It's a perfect casting.
And he's an icon now.
Hey, Karate Kid, let's see the move.
What's the first thing you think of when you see the Karate Kid?
Wax on, wax off.
Is that your favourite quote already?
No, it's just I think it's the first thing that springs to mind. There's a lot of films to me that I saw loads and loads and loads when I was younger. And this, I know for a lot of people, was one of those films. Not so much for me. I did see it a few times, so I was familiar with the storyline and, a lot of the quotes and things like that, but it wasn't one that formed a massive part of my childhood. Yeah. So I don't have I don't have a vivid memory of this. I think... Plus, I was born in 85, so,
Yeah, well, that's true.
I wasn't out yet.
I don't actually remember when I seen it the first time. When I was a kid, I wanted to do karate and judo and all these things that you see, but you don't stick with anything. I mean, some kids do. But personally, I did judo for about 3 weeks. I did karate. I mastered it. Did karate for a couple of months when I was younger. It was only when I was older I started to realise the benefit of it, from a kind of training perspective and being fitter, and being a bit more self-confident because you think you can handle yourself a bit better and all that kind of stuff. But everybody can kind of relate to the story. In general, about being maybe a bit of an outsider. Everyone's been in some situation when they're younger where they feel like they're an outsider and they feel like there's people there who are bigger and stronger and better than
Even
them.
as an adult.
Yeah, and you feel like out of place and vulnerable. You try your best to fit in, and sometimes you rub people the wrong way, and they can make it difficult for you to sort of ingratiate yourself into that community or whatever, the school or whatever it is. So I think everybody can relate to it, and I think even from a young age, this hit a spot with me. I was never bullied per se at school, but You know, there's always people in school that are bigger and tougher and stronger, and there's
Yeah.
people that you're scared of. You know, there's people that you're a bit fearful of, that you're worried that you would get on the wrong side of them. So I think everyone can relate to the idea of being strong enough to deal with anything that comes your way, and eventually overcoming the odds and beating the bullies is a great kind of universal story. You know, it's maybe not exactly as grand as a hero's journey, but you know, there's elements of it there.
Definitely.
You know, like overcoming the odds and obstacles, and there's the dip, and then the wizened master comes to your aid and sort of like guides you to the light or whatever. In this case, it's just to the trophy. I've watched it numerous times over the years and it never gets old. I think it even gets better as I get older because you understand more of the nuances in it. And I think I appreciate more the acting and the story. And you can see why, you know, it got Oscar nominations and all this kind of thing. It was a huge kind of pop cultural phenomenon, even in the UK. I think Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee film, sparked a massive interest in the US and the UK in martial arts, and especially nunchucks.
Everybody had a pair.
With them.
And themselves.
But yeah, the Karate Kid definitely sparked an interest in martial arts. And because again, it's that thing. You see it, you believe it, you think, I could do that. And that's a testament to the strength of the story. It feels believable. It feels like it's possible. And that's what you want from any story that's grounded in reality, of course. Superhero movies and stuff like that, you know, you just take it with real
you
high...
suspend your disbelief.
Yeah, it's high fantasy, you know, it's never going to happen. But this is something that you feel like, I could do that.
How did you do that?
Don't know. First time.
Ralph Macchio plays Daniel, and him and his mum, as we said, move across America from New Jersey to the glorious sunshine of California. And it's not all sunshine and roses there, is it?
Unfortunately not.
So his mum was promising them blondes everywhere and swimming pools and all this kind of stuff. And they turn up at their apartment and, you know, it's that thing where all of the illusions get shattered quite quickly. You know, you can see he turns up, the apartment's not what they thought it was going to be. It's got problems, swimming pool's bare. There's a kind of mad old lady living downstairs.
Who comes from New York.
And within a few days, he's sort of got problems with the local bullies, like we talked about, you know, so everything's going really bad for him. And I think it's amazing how he overcomes all of that. That you can see all his frustration, you can see his temper tantrums, you can see that he wants to stand up for himself, but he just doesn't feel like he's got the skills or he's not adequate enough to do it, and he just wants to run away. If you don't feel equipped for something, it's the scariest thing. What I think's great about his character development is the respect that he learns from Mr. Miyagi over the course of the film, and how he turns to love him. You know, obviously he's a surrogate father, you know, and we don't know where Daniel's father is in this scenario. Right?
It's not mentioned at all.
It's not mentioned,
no.
Right? They could be separated, they could be dead, whatever. We don't know. But the bottom line is he doesn't have a father figure there, so he desperately needs one. You know, I think really this character needs one, someone to keep him on the straight and narrow. His mum does try and help, but she's really protective of him, and I think at that point in his life he doesn't really want to be protected. He wants to be able to do it himself, and I think that's largely where the frustration comes from, that he can't. So he feels like I'm useless, I can't do this. So he needs somebody to take him by the hand and kind of say, this is how you do it. You know, I can straighten you out, I can put you on this path.
This is how you sand a deck. You be shit.
So, like I say, I think the first moment of respect really is, you know, when he first visits Miyagi in that room, and he walks right in.
Yep.
And Miyagi turns and draws him daggers, you know, and he walks back out. And then when you see Miyagi going to his door, he chaps the door and waits to be invited in, like a vampire.
I was going to say, not unlike a vampire. So have we explored the possibility that Mr. Miyagi is in fact a vampire?
He is.
Just saying.
He's actually 300 years old. But yeah, there's that moment where he waits, he chaps, and Daniel says, come in, and he comes in and he fixes the faucet, and that's when he notices. I think he's a wise old master, isn't he?
He is. He's like a little Yoda.
Yeah, within a few minutes, he's worked out the problem. The boy's doing karate from a book.
With really poor form.
And, you know, he's got a black eye. And he sees through the excuse straight away. And I think the next time you see Daniel interact with Miyagi when going back into his house, he's learned, when he sees that his bike has been fixed, you know, after that sort of the altercation with the skeletons, he sees his bike's been fixed and he waits at the door, he chaps it, waits at the door and is invited in and he goes in. So at that point you can see that he's developed respect for Miyagi already, and maybe even some kind of love and appreciation.
Yeah, and he's kind of like taking that part of his culture and and taking that on board.
No points or no points. You're dead meat.
Poor Daniel-san continues to be bullied by the damn Cobra Kais. Who keep beating him up, and it's pretty severe beatings. Like, see, looking back at this as an adult, like he really gets, as we would say in Glasgow, a doing.
He does on a number of occasions. And it's also psychological.
Yeah. It's some really hardcore bullying that he's subjected to. And eventually he asks Mr. Miyagi to go down to the Cobra Kai dojo and speak to Kreese, the sensei down there, and ask him to tell his damn Cobra Kais to lay off him.
Yeah.
And eventually, after he takes quite a big beating, Mr. Miyagi goes down, and that is when the gauntlet is laid down. Do you lay down a gauntlet? Do you?
Well, I mean,
what
it's
do you do with a gauntlet?
It's like any sort of battle scenario, isn't it? It was going to be a duel of some description. There's always a gauntlet has to be laid down. A challenge has to be issued, and that's quite funny in that moment. It was one of my favourite moments, actually, is when Miyagi speaks to Kreese and he never takes his eyes off him.
That's amazing.
He stares at him and doesn't blink. Even no matter what Kreese does, no matter where he moves, no matter what he looks at, he stares him down, does not budge. And again, it's that he's trying to intimidate him physically, you know? So Daniel does get bullied quite a lot in this. And as you said, it's quite extreme at points. And I think it's the last one with the skeletons. I think there's a point where it looks like they actually could have killed him.
Yeah.
Because they were being reckless. They were
totally.
they had got to the point where Johnny was so enraged that he does that. They get him to hold him up and he does that flying kick, and luckily, you know, Miyagi pushes him out of the way, but he breaks the sign. I mean, who's to say what that could have done to him? You know, so yeah, that was quite dangerous. I called that the dance of death. You know, they got all these skeletons around him. It was kind of like the Jason and the Argonauts.
No, it is, isn't it? Especially because it's dark, so all you see is like the little bony.
It's mad. It's a really cool iconic image of the 80s. That is those guys in skeleton suits. But yeah, I think at that point he was kind of lucky.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the last straw moment.
Because I think up until this point he's kind of like pure battle, but when he realises how far they're taking it, he agrees to go down and speak to John Kreese.
Well, it does still take a wee bit of persuading, remember?
Oh, that's true.
You know, because at first he says, you know, it's not my place to get involved. And he's probably right, because
it's like if your dad went down to the school.
Well, that's it. It just exacerbates the problem, doesn't it? It makes it bigger, and he's maybe thinking these teenagers can... You know, Daniel's got the right idea, because he says to him, you know, like, you've got the right idea, you should go and visit the sensei and talk to him about it. But after you meet Kreese, you realise that was never worked out anyway.
Exactly.
Daniel would probably have been told to challenge right there and then in that dojo.
So he might not have made it out alive.
Quite possibly.
Kreese at that point then throws down the gauntlet. He agrees that he'll back off, or he'll tell the Cobra Kais to lay off Daniel until they meet
prima
again.
donna.
The prima. Oh, that's right. He calls him that, doesn't he? It's probably the first time I heard that expression. He tells the boys, I think it's all boys, isn't it? There's no female.
There's no women in that group.
There's no. So he tells them to back off, leave the prima donna alone, and they'll meet again at the All Valley Karate Championships.
Exactly.
Power, whole body.
So yeah, then Daniel begins his training with Miyagi, and again, there's a great penny drop moment in that sequence. So this is like the middle act, really. The first act is really setting up the love story and also the conflict. The second act is split into two, isn't it? You know, there's like all the again, surreptitious
the child
training.
Slavery section.
You know, where he's basically training in muscle memory. And it's quite a clever technique, because, you know, what is he? He's got about 3 months or something to the competition. So if every single day he's working on a different technique and he's doing it like 10,000 times each or whatever, you know, with each hand, it's quite possible that he could learn how to use it. And again, Miyagi doesn't saturate him with lots of techniques.
Yeah, he doesn't overload him.
Yeah, he says that at one point in the movie as well. It's like, remember the quality of your techniques, not the quantity. They know more than you, but you've got good quality. So remember your basics. There's a lot of great lessons in there about those particular things, but I think you maybe have to be a martial artist or possibly someone in the artistic discipline or something like that, a physical discipline, to fully appreciate that, where you realise about repetition, and strong fundamentals and all these kind of things. It applies to so many things, but it's kind of unspoken in this film. But yeah, it's definitely something you can take away from it.
So after painting the fence, big boards right hand, small boards left hand.
Yes.
After washing all the cars,
painting the house
side to side, waxing on, waxing off, and sanding all of the decking. Little LaRusso is feeling slightly exploited, and he wants to know when his training's starting. He's angry at Mr. Miyagi because he thinks he's taking advantage of him at this point.
Exactly.
And then...
That's my favourite moment in the film, I think, is that penny drop moment where he shows him that he's actually been learning all this time. And you should have just trusted the process. You know, Miyagi could have been annoyed at that point and said, you know, you've not trusted what I'm doing, you're not a worthy student, bye-bye. But he understands his frustration because he knows from his earlier moments that Daniel can be easily frustrated, like we said. You know, he can get, like I said, he can get angry and fly off the handle a wee bit and not see the bigger picture. But this is part of his character development. So I think that's why he maybe sticks with him and says, okay, show me it. But you can see he's angry. You know, you just think I'm taking advantage of you, but here, this is what you've been doing. It's that moment where he throws all the combinations and Daniel blocks them all in one and then they just bow. That's a great moment.
Yeah.
It's the look on his face, on Daniel's face, it's just kind of like absolute amazement and awe, and he's thinking so many things at once. It's like, I can do this. All of these heroes' journeys have that moment where they realise that they're worthy, that I can do this, and it gives them the spur to sort of carry on to the next level, you know, or to the boss, whatever you want to call it in this case. You know, but they know they've got the fight in them and they've got the tools. But yeah, that's the penny drop moment. I love that. And then obviously Daniel moves on. His training then develops, it grows in intensity, and then he moves on to the tournament. And of course, he wins it eventually, and he overcomes the odds in that again, you know, because he's really up against it. And again, he shows real character. He doesn't get frustrated. Only maybe a wee bit when he realises or when he thinks he's not going to be able to compete. But it's more competitive at that point. It's more like, I could do this.
Far.
Exactly. It wasn't like, I can't do this. This was like, I actually could do this.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the chance has been taken away from me.
By cheating as well, which is very frustrating.
Yeah, so that's a development. Instead of being frustrated and saying, I can't do this, it was, I could do this and I've lost the opportunity. That's a different mindset. So Miyagi gives him the old hot hand rub.
Which is kind of similar to like in football here, and that's soccer to our friends in the US. The physio would come out with the magic sponge.
Yes, it's the Miyagi magic sponge.
So gets the Miyagi magic sponge and then jumps back out, whips out the crane technique and kicks Johnny's ass.
Lesson about the balance, not just karate, lesson for whole life.
And the whole reason Daniel gets to where he does is because of Mr. Miyagi, of course. And we talked about who it is. It's Noriyuki Pat Morita. He's perfect for the role. Had to audition 5 times, all that stuff. But yeah, it would have been a travesty if he didn't get it. I mean, being a cinephile, I would love to have seen Toshiro Mifune in it.
Yeah.
That would have been incredible. But I just can't see anybody but Pat Morita in it now. And it's simply because I think he's also got that comedic edge. Coming from that background to stand-up comedy and stuff, I think that really perfectly suits it because he's got this kind of wit.
Exactly,
and, you know, he's got a kind of humour to him as well. But he's also got the emotional beats. Like, he nails it. Like, there's a couple of sequences in this film where the acting is brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's no surprise that he was nominated for an Oscar.
Particularly for me, the point when it's the birthday of his wife, who passed away in childbirth. He's having a wee tipple.
And the irony is, he was fighting for the Americans at that point.
Yeah.
He was an American GI, fought in the 442nd, and his wife was put in an internment camp at the time. You know, they called it, what was it? They called it a relocation camp or something like that.
Something.
But essentially it was an internment camp, and she was in there and lost the baby. So it's all a story, but these things actually did happen in real life. That was a real thing.
And actually, Pat Morita, he was actually ill as a child. I think he had a form of spinal tuberculosis, but when he was finally released out of hospital, he was released directly into an internment camp. So he actually had experience of being interned as a US citizen on US soil. And it's only touched on very briefly in this film, but the impact is quite strong. And I think for a lot of people, it's maybe the only exposure they've had to that piece of history. Yeah. And it's a very important one. And I think the fact that this, you know, fairly not light-hearted film, but, you know, a film for kids, highlighted that. I think that was very important.
And again, I think because, as you just said, he had some experience of it, like he'd actually lived that, he drew on that for his acting. You know, you could see it. There was a realism to that. And when he's trying to hold back the tears whilst, you know, he's going through this, what the captain or the colonel or whatever had said to him as they told him about his wife. And he just breaks down, sits down in a chair. And obviously that's the first time you see him showing any form of emotion, really, aside from a wee bit of exasperation occasionally with certain situations. But he's Okinawan, but the Okinawans and the Japanese share sort of common traits, I think, quite common traits. And we know a lot of Japanese people, it's a very Japanese thing to never really show your emotions too much in public and hold them all away. And it's only really when people get drunk you start to see maybe a different side of them, you know, that you can see that this person's really bubbly and full of life, and, you know, or this person's actually, you know, quite sanguine, and they know they've got maybe a lot of problems and actually a wee bit depressed. But it's really only that time that you start to see it, and I think that's really cool that was in this film as well. You know, he didn't show any emotion really until that time. And you get wee bits and pieces, like I said. There's the other emotional beats, like you got a wee bit of anger in him when he's training Daniel and he thinks he's not teaching him and all that kind of stuff. And you can see the pride I love that final shot you get in the film where it's like he's nodding and just looking, and you can see he's so full of pride at what he's just done, what he's accomplished, and it's not about him.
No.
It's about Daniel. He's looking at him lovingly like a proud father. I think it's an amazing performance from Pat Morita.
White train.
So I won't have to fight.
One of the things that I really love about Miyagi's character is all of those kind of pseudo-Buddhist koans that he has going on. You've got the one about no bad students, only bad teachers.
Exactly.
Which is, very important. But I think the most important one, the one that sort of ties in most to the plot, is the idea of cultivating your own reality. Whatever is in your mind, you bring it out and you can shape your own reality. And he teaches him that through the bonsai tree, where he says, picture it in your mind, bring it out in front of you, and make the tree look like the one in your head. And that's a really strong message about believing in the power of yourself and that you can shape your own reality. So if you believe that everything is negative and things are going to go wrong, then you can probably bring that into the world by you make mistakes, or you don't take the risks that you maybe could take, and you'll make certain choices based on that fear.
Or if you think something's going to go badly, then you're inviting that in.
It's also the same with positive thinking, visualize what you're going to do. There's a lot of studies on this now about visualization. You see a lot of elite sports people do the same thing. They visualize something over and over and over until it becomes like a habit in their mind, and they can't unsee it. As far as I've heard tennis players talk about it, I've heard basketball players talk about it, I've heard football, soccer players talk about it as well. Visualizing the ball being where you want it to be, and then just following it through, and then your training takes over. You obviously have to have the skills to back up. You can't imagine I'm gonna hit this golf ball into that hole.
I've just been imagining it at home in my bed, so I'm well on my way to be able to master this.
So there's obviously skills that go with that. But again, visualization, mastering the self, mastering your own mind, and then bringing that into the world.
And what I think's really nice, and obviously you're a jobby because this was going to be my favourite quote section.
Was it?
But what's really nice about it is Daniel says to him, how do I know if my picture is the right one?
Yes.
If the picture in my head is the right one.
Exactly.
And that's a fear that I think a lot of people have. How do I know that I'm doing the right thing? How am I on the right path? And Miyagi says to him, and I can't remember the exact quote, he pretty much says to him, as long as it's true to you and it's your picture, then that's what it is.
That's exactly it. He says if it comes from inside you, it's right.
And that's beautiful. That's lovely.
That's exactly it.
And then he lets a child with no experience hack away at some bonsai plants that he's been cultivating for years. Brave man.
Is that a goof? You ever got a problem with that? Desecration of bonsai tree. But yeah, I think that's a really important message, and that's it takes that through the entire film. Where it's that thing about fear being the mind killer again. If you let your fear overtake you, you're going to fail. You're going to put yourself in situations where you'll fail, but put yourself in a positive space, and you're probably going to succeed more.
You're being a better mindset, definitely. These definitely feel like Jedi quotes.
Yeah, well, that's what I called it last night. I said Miyagi's kind of like, there's Yoda-isms. Because he even says at one point, basically, do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah, that's pretty much one of the first lessons, isn't
That's one of the first lessons. So he said, if you walk on the right side of the road, you're safe. If you walk on the left side of the road, you're safe. If you walk in the middle, you're going to get hit with a car and get squashed like a grape. So it's the exact same idea. You can either do it or don't do it.
But there's no middle ground.
There's no middle ground here. Yep. You just have to land on one side and say, right, this is the path I'm going to follow. Okay,
so maybe that is how we should attack 2021 rather than with the Cobra Kai.
Do or do not. There is no try.
No mercy.
So those are our heroes. Let's talk about the dark side of the karate world in the valley, the Cobra Kais.
This is Karate Kid X Star Wars.
Dur, dur, dur.
Right here. So yeah, the Cobra Kai, they're just amazing villains. We're going to just take them all as a group rather than sort of going into them individually. Clearly there's two sort of main sort of antagonists, and that's Johnny Lawrence, who is quite clearly a bully, I think, which we'll talk about. And then his sensei, John Kreese, who is really the villain of the piece.
Oh,
I think everybody looks at Johnny as being the problem, but Miyagi understands this, and you can see that the way he talks about it. It's like there's no bad students, only bad teachers. So Kreese has taught these boys to do the things they do in the way that they do them, and they obviously follow that to the letter because they fear him. but they also respect him. I don't know how much of the respect is actually coming from fear.
Probably quite a lot of
Probably
it.
quite a lot of it.
But he does seem like the kind of person that is good at manipulating people as well.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he's got all the kind of badges of honour, you know, that have served, and he's like a Green Beret and all that kind of stuff.
And I think
he's
especially
tough.
for younger people, there's quite often that feeling like that you should always do what grown-ups tell you to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think extreme role models are easier to follow
yeah.
than the ones that don't stand out so much.
Particularly when people don't have guidance
Exactly.
in their own home life or things like that.
And he's like an extreme version of someone who would be good at combat. You know, he's big, he's strong, he's tough, he's got that big, huge jaw with a bullet chin. You know, he's got pictures of him with guns and all these military decorations, and he would probably demonstrate by breaking loads of stuff. You can imagine like going into that class first time and him doing a demonstration and basically beating somebody up.
And people being really impressed though as well and thinking, wow, this guy knows his stuff.
Yeah.
He's
But I mean,
badass.
I think the people that are turning up there are looking for ways to defend themselves or fight. You mean, look at Daniel, right? Daniel turns up looking to learn how to fight. It's Miyagi that changes his mindset to like, it's not about fighting, it's about, you know, it's about defending yourself and only using it when necessary. What they're being taught is to strike first, you know, notoriously strike first, strike hard, no mercy. So these are the kind of guys that you would get into a bit of an argument with, and before you knew it, you'd have a fist in your face or a boot in
broken
your face, you know, because they'd just jump. They would just not give the opportunity. And some might say that's smart. You know, this is like another argument. Like, that's the easier way to deal with something, is just to not get into the argument, not let it escalate and just finish it.
Finish him!
So you could say it's pragmatic. But in this case, I think it's shown to be very much the wrong methodology. It's, you know, it's a bully mentality that they're fostering.
Yeah.
And I think the argument about who's the bully in this film it falls down quite quickly when you watch it.
Definitely.
Because there's a lot of things that the Cobra Kais do to Daniel that are kind of uncalled for and unwarranted. Like, they've already shown that they can beat him easily and he's scared of them, but they still come after him. So that's a bully mentality. That's not just somebody who's stronger. You know, who just, you know,
And there's
defends himself maybe.
And there's 5 of them and 1 of him all the time.
Pretty much all the time,
And yeah, they do strike first.
They do.
And show no mercy.
Yeah. I also love the fact that within that group, like, Johnny seems to be almost like temperate, but on the kind of more aggressive.
Yeah.
But there's other guys in the group that are even more aggressive than he is. You know, you've got
who are like egging him on.
Exactly. You've got Dutch, like Steve McQueen's son, right? Chad McQueen. He seems to be the most aggressive, you know, and Johnny seems to be the kind of, I've beaten him, there you go, you're down, punk. I'm gonna go. But if I see you again, I'm gonna do it again. But it's usually at the kind of calling of somebody in his ear. And I think there's another guy, Tommy, as well. You know, he's a bit of a shit as well.
So it really sounds like probably a lot of people went to different kinds of schools, but real school ground fighting, you know, where there was always someone who was egging people on, and there always seemed to be someone who started fights and caused fights and walked away without actually being involved, and those were always the dangerous people.
Yeah, the troublemakers always tended to be guys or girls that knew somebody strong.
Yeah, exactly.
So they could get away with it. So the person who was perhaps stronger or tougher didn't necessarily have to fight or wouldn't get any fights because people would know not to mess with that person. But it was the other people who couldn't quite would say, all right, I'm going to use this shield, you know, get them. So, and that seems to be the case here, because he was clearly the better of all of them as far as who was the toughest or who was the best fighter. And they just loved using him in that, and because it made their group stronger by extension. So then, you know, they don't get messed with because they're part of the bigger group.
Yeah.
You know, it's only when that group has been broken up, and again, that's how the film plays out.
You never really see them as like individuals either, do you?
No, you don't. And that's why when they're broken up, they're not as bad as you thought they were. They're not as badass. Especially guys like Tommy, who gets defeated quite quickly, and they're obviously very skilled, but they're too aggressive.
Yeah.
And they let their anger dictate their movements and their fighting, and they just get easily picked off by somebody who's more cerebral and more defensive.
And it feels like towards the end of the film, especially in the tournament, they start to maybe not outright question, but you can see they're thinking a little bit more about Creasy's methods, and some of that, like, you know, Creasy's basically telling them to cheat. At one point, he tells one of the guys to sweep the leg to
Bobby,
and actually, you know, to hit the injury.
Yeah, that's Bobby. And again, like I said earlier, there's a dynamic in their group, and Bobby's always the one that seems to say, he's had enough. Like, can we just leave this here? He doesn't seem to want to bully people, but he's part of this group. He's obviously a very important part of that group, and he's a very good fighter as well, in his own right. And I think he believes, like at the tournament level, he believes that he can beat Daniel without cheating, and he kind of gets robbed of it. I think the inference is that Bobby fought Johnny for the title last time.
Ah.
Do you know what I mean? I think I seem to remember that from one of the other films or something, that Bobby was actually like the other finalist the year before or something like that. But anyway, he was really good and wanted to win it fairly, but also he didn't want to bully anybody. He didn't want to hurt anybody. So he was kind of like the best character there, but just didn't have a strong enough voice because he was always drowned out by the other two. Like I said, you had two other people on the far extremes, and they were enough to keep Johnny doing what he was doing. But I don't think there's any doubt that he's a bully. As we say, we could talk about Daniel not getting involved in the first instance, but at the end of the day, he was doing the chivalrous thing. You find out that Ali and him weren't going out. Ali and Johnny weren't a thing. So he's turned up with his friends, he's grabbed their radio, he's not giving it back, and Daniel's tried to just try and calm the situation, get the radio back. Johnny puts him to the ground. He then knocks him down as well, and then Daniel sucker punches him.
But yeah, I think by that point he's been shoved down like 3 times.
He's already been on the ground a couple of times, so, and then he gets totally beaten up. And it's the fact that they go after him again and again and again, and the water hose, it's not really enough to warrant what comes next. Basically a 5-on-1 beatdown.
Just about getting killed.
And like I said, it could have caused him some serious damage with that last kick. Miyagi hadn't turned up. So,
Hey, what kind of belt do you have?
Canvas. You like? JC Penney 398.
The Cobra Kai dojo have these really badass gis with cut off sleeves and like the big cobra on the back.
Yeah.
They look badass.
They certainly do. I mean, it's a great character design as well. I mean, they wear black, bad guys wear black, good guys wear white. As a group, they're amazing. But yeah, John Kreese is their leader. And Kreese. Maybe that's why they picked Cobra Kai.
Maybe, it sounds
Kreese.
Slimy, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I'm really sorry if your name's Kreese.
making a snake sound. Kreese. But yeah, John Kreese is the bad guy in this film. Like he's cultivating killers essentially because it's almost like he's still in the army, and I think he just meets his match with Miyagi, and like that whole stare down between those two is one of the key points in the movie. That is another lesson for Daniel, even though he might not see it at the time. You can see Daniel looks worried when that kind of conversation's taking place, but Miyagi's in complete control of that situation, even though again it looks like he's got the advantage because he's taller, it's in his own dojo, but he's showing no fear whatsoever. That's the big lesson to Daniel, is like face him down. You you can be respectful, you don't have to start anything, you just have to know where the dangers are, but don't back down, don't look away, and you'll get respect. You'll get respect, and he does a wee bit. I think Miyagi gets a bit of respect from him, even though it's grudging. I think there's definitely a moment where he's gonna like, this guy's not scared.
I think at one point he says something like that, doesn't he? He says something like, "Oh, I like you," or something.
He says like, I like it, I think he just loves the idea of the challenge, but like I say, he's a war veteran, and I think he understands when someone's scared, when someone has fear, and if he's being honest with himself, I don't think he sees any fear in Miyagi whatsoever. So there's probably a grudge and respect happening there. And he looks away first a lot, obviously all the time, because Miyagi doesn't blink.
It is interesting, I think, as well, that they show that both of these characters are war veterans. Yeah. They obviously didn't have the same experience. And actually, you could argue that, well, at this point, we don't know much about their experiences, but we know that Mr. Miyagi has fought for a country who has imprisoned him and his family, or has imprisoned his family.
And he's went on to win like a Valor, was it Honor? Medal of Honor?
Medal of Honor, And, he's come out a very respectful, humble human being, whereas Kreese has turned into a monster.
Well, that's exactly it. He's... But again, that's one of the great things about the new Karate Kid TV show, like Cobra Kai. So they're digging a wee bit deeper into, I don't want to spoil that for anybody, so we'll not talk about it, but they're digging a little bit deeper into Kreese's background, and you can maybe kind of see a bit of sympathy for him, to see like where some of his traits came from and all that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting to go over. Yeah,
maybe it explains his story rather than excuses it.
I don't have much of a cheering section.
You got me.
In the end, it will be in Daniel's hands.
Daniel's love interest in the movie, and well, love interest of both sort of characters, as far as Daniel and
Sorry.
Johnny's concerned, even though Johnny doesn't have a hope, really. But yeah, that's Elizabeth Shue. So she's the one who's probably went on to the best career after Karate Kid.
As an actress.
As an actress, like Ralph Macchio has been in a couple of things. I think he was in My Cousin Vinny, and off the top of my head, I can't really remember that much, but I think he was really well known for The Outsiders.
He's had a lot of bit parts and things.
Yeah. I mean, Outsiders and Karate Kid was essentially what he's best known for, especially Karate Kid, because it was so sort of global with its success. But Elizabeth Shue, I think she got nominated for an Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, Nicolas Cage movie.
Okay.
But yeah, she's obviously had a resurgence as well.
Yep.
She's been in The Boys.
The Boys, yep. Which is
Madeline,
fantastic. If you've not seen it, it's really fantastic. Check it out.
But yeah, she's probably got the best career as far as like the rest of the 80s. I think Flatliners, you've got Adventures in Babysitting and some other things as well. So, but she's a really good actress. She's really talented. And again, she's really good in this as well. She's the kind of perfect young blonde Californian girl and exactly the kind of thing that Daniel's mum was talking about.
Yeah.
So the blonde hair, the blue eyes, and she comes from like a very wealthy family and so on, and she shows quite a lot of range in this because you can see her frustration with Daniel, like you can see her anger at times. I love the way she punches Johnny, and she hits him with a right-hander at one point, so she stands up for herself.
Which is interesting as well, because you see in the background when that's happening, like this boy, her ex-partner, who's essentially assaulting her in front of her.
Yeah.
He's planting a kiss on her, which she clearly doesn't want. And her parents are then annoyed at
they
her.
kind of take her side. They take his side, sorry. As soon as he walks away, they're kind of like...
So 80s.
Yeah. They're like, oh, you okay, Johnny? How dare she hit you? But again, I think that comes back, it's a classic 80s trope, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Of, the haves and the have-nots, and the haves want their offspring to be with other halves.
Johnny was from the right side of the tracks, the nice blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy with the rich parents.
Well, that's it. They're supposedly the perfect match, but,
He's a dick.
But he's a dick, yeah, exactly. But Daniel and Ali are more like kind of oil and water almost, where they're not supposed to mix, but they do. They're actually, it's more like opposites attract. He's very different from her. As far as his background and how he looks and all that kind of stuff as well, there's everything about him. The family background is different, but they do work. And again, that's a very common 80s trait. You got, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, all these things. It's all kind of stories about wrong side of the tracks, the rich people and the poor people, and they shouldn't mix, but they do, and they find something in common ground.
And Ali is a lovely character because, she doesn't have that outlook, and, she doesn't look for the boy with the money or anything like that. She's very open-minded. She thinks for herself. She's a nice character. Ali with an eye.
Ali with an eye. Yeah, she's got a really strong mind. And that's probably part of her upbringing as well. You could say that she's been brought up to have strong opinions and take care of herself and look after herself. But she hasn't taken on any of the arrogance, which clearly Johnny has. He's a wee bit arrogant. He thinks... I mean, you can see that with Johnny's friends as well. When, Mrs. LaRusso pulls up in her old station wagon.
Oh, God bless her heart.
And they take the piss out of her car. I thought that was pretty bad.
So mean. I felt hurt.
It's actually the meanest thing in it.
It's awful.
Because there's no reason to drag his mum into it, and that's casting aspersions on your whole your life essentially. Like you're so poor. Look at you, like that's all your mum can only afford that car.
It's just so cruel. Yeah. I mean, I know they beat him up and that's really awful, but
well, you know what I mean?
This feels like more personal.
Like, she just seems really lovely. That's another, it's a sequence where, Ali meets Daniel's mum for the first time, and obviously things go to shit, the car doesn't start, but it's the way she deals with it. She's straight into action, like, do you know what? We'll just go out and push. Do you know how to drive this? That's fine. Let's just do that.
And it's, don't see Ali kind of go, oh my God, what is this? Exactly. She takes it all in her stride. She's not phased by it as well. And that's really nice. That's
good character work.
Good females.
Yeah, I like how his mum is like, she's super protective of him, but she's not phased.
Yeah.
I think that's a very common thing with people from maybe lower working class backgrounds. They don't get fazed by those things. You can have two minds. You can be really resentful of someone with money and be like, oh, I hate those people because they've all got loads of cash, and they've got everything I want. But she just doesn't care.
Yeah.
She's just like, I'm happy with my life. and I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
And, you know, she shouts up to them, you know, that kind of
she's
thing.
like, oh, you've got a beautiful house, and Ali's like, oh,
Yeah.
thanks, and it's not like, oh yeah, thanks, I've got an amazing house, yeah. Like, you know, they're both really respectful of each other and really.
Yeah, I mean, the car's taken off, she's just like, you know, it happens all the time. It's just like a normal thing, and she doesn't even bat an eyelid. She's not like embarrassed. She doesn't say, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, and
know,
you can see the parents standing up the stairs with like their squash rackets or their tennis rackets, like aghast.
Yeah. I think what's also good about that sequence is when, you know, when Daniel's sort of nervous and he kicks the brick off it, and they're actually affronted.
Yeah.
You know, they've got such a brass neck that this poorer kid, seeing something of theirs falling apart, it's like, oh, it's not as pristine as it should be.
Yeah.
And they're so proud of those things. And again, that's in direct contrast to Lucille, Daniel's mum.
Oh, I never even thought of
Do you know what I mean?
that.
She's it doesn't matter, it's fine, the motor's shit and it's broken down, but who cares? Let's just go on
they're
with
a little bit peed off that the facade has been broken.
That's it. They're prideful. And that's that kind of thing where, you know, we talked a little bit about Johnny having that arrogance.
Yep.
And he's probably got that aspect to his character. He comes from a similar background, but she doesn't have that. She's far nicer and just more easygoing. And it's probably going to make more of herself. And you can see that, you know, in future, when you look at the kind of later things, she obviously becomes a doctor and all that kind of stuff. So, and Johnny sort of falls by the wayside if you've seen the Cobra Kai TV show. So it kind of shows that part of their character had consequences in their life going forward.
So do you want to know who they considered for the part of Ali with an eye?
Who did they consider?
Demi Moore.
No.
Terrible.
I mean, she
choice.
was in St Elmo's Fire not long after this.
Which I hate.
She was a rich arsehole in it, though.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think
they were
she
all
would be
rich
too
arseholes.
smarmy. I hate St Elmo's Fire. Like, I love the song so much. I really love that song, but I hate every single one of the characters. They're total. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that's kind of the point.
I know, but I just can't.
But that's another film entirely. So let's not go there. But yeah, Demi Moore, I don't think would have worked.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. I would have wanted to punch her. I think
Elizabeth Shue's got the perfect amount of. You could tell she comes from that background and you can believe it. But you can also tell that she's warm and gentle and loving and caring and genuine. Yeah, exactly.
I feel a little
you can believe that.
Yeah, I don't think we would have got that quality with Demi Moore.
No.
Or Demi Moore or whoever. Demi.
But yeah, she looks a bit more aloof and a bit more.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know her personally, obviously.
I know, she's probably lovely.
She's probably lovely.
Hi, Demi. Thanks for listening.
It's just the impression that you get, and I think she would most likely have been a friend. See, like the friends of Ali.
Yeah.
That was them going, why are you hanging about with this guy? He's such an idiot. He's a loser. I would have seen her more like that, as opposed to, like, you know, the love interest.
Concentrate, focus, power. Remember balance.
I think that's all our main players, but I do think it's important also to let you know that the part of Johnny was nearly cast to Crispin Glover.
Oh God, that would have been terrible.
It would have been awful. Like,
George McFly.
Can you imagine George McFly?
George McFly, Cobra Kai.
George McFly kick.
That's wonderful.
It would not have worked for me. Whereas, I've forgotten the guy's name that plays him.
His name is William Zabka.
So yeah, William Zabka, he was actually a wrestler. Although he didn't have any karate background, he had wrestling background, and I think that kind of physicality,
wrestling in high school and stuff.
Exactly, I think
Not
that
like
physicality was important in that role.
Oh, you could definitely see that he was physically capable.
Yep.
You know, the action sequences are really good, and he looks like he knows what he's doing. You know, he looks physically good.
And after some of his movie parts, he actually went on to study film production.
Right.
And he actually, I think he wrote and produced a short film called Most, which is also known as The Bridge, which was nominated for an Academy Award. So I think he was actually quite successful in that as well. And he co-produced,
the Cobra Kai.
Co-executive produced. So does that mean he didn't really produce it?
Oh, I don't know. That all gets lost in the whole.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't really know what executives do.
I think it's sometimes just a name, isn't it?
As far as the technical aspects go in this film, there's no special effects in it for a start, but that I'm aware of. And I don't think there's anything striking from a kind of directorial perspective. You know, it's just a really well told, really well made film. There's nothing about the film that's odd. So there's no shots that are odd. Like, John G. Avildsen is a really good filmmaker. And again, because he had the template of Rocky, a lot of those things are used again. There's a lot of sequences that mirror what happens in Rocky. Like, there's shots where, for example, Daniel's doing something with his hands and it pans up to a mirror.
Yeah.
And you see that in Rocky. Like, so he copied a lot of his own shots, and they're great compositions. That's why he used them. They tell a wee bit of a story in their own. So yeah, there's nothing about that. It's very, very competent. It's very well put together. I think it's really well paced. I was really surprised that it was 127 minutes. I always thought of The Karate Kid as a 90-minute movie.
Yeah.
But it is that second act. When you watch it again from a more critical lens, it's the second act is really split into two, pretty much. He thinks he's not been trained properly, blah, blah, blah. And then finally the penny drops. And then that's when training proper begins. So it's almost like double montage type of deal. Yeah. There's not really a montage in this film. No. But you get moments of training.
Yeah, some nice silhouettes
aspects
on the beach.
Yeah, so I think he departed. It was a wee bit different from Rocky in that respect, where there was, he had like very obvious training montages where there's a song going over it. But the only really bit you get is the fight at the end.
Yeah.
And the tournament's taking place at the same time. So I think that's really powerful. I absolutely love that. That song's amazing.
Yep.
Joe Bean Esposito. So from a directing perspective, I don't think there's anything that you could like comment on apart from the fact that it's super competent, well put together. I think what's great about it though is the action choreography.
Yeah.
Considering that not many of the guys were like actual proper martial artists.
Yeah.
Like, there was a couple of guys obviously in the tournament sequence who you can see that guy is a martial artist. Like, he knows what he's doing. And as you said, William Zabka wasn't, he wasn't like a karate person or whatever, but he knew wrestling, so he was physically capable. But I think the key to that is that you've got Pat E. Johnson, who's a really famous karateka, like famous choreographer, action star. He's in Enter the Dragon, did a whole bunch of stuff. I think he's worked with Bruce Lee on a couple of occasions as well. But it was having somebody like him involved in the production made a huge difference to how the karate looked and how the action looked. And it all looked very realistic, even though you could see there was limitations to the actors.
Yeah.
It was shot really well, so he obviously knew how to tell the director, listen, if you get it from this angle, get it from that angle, that's going to look like it's got more power, you're going to hide that aspect. It's something action directors and action choreographers like can lack sometimes these days, where they don't understand that you have to try and hide the limitations of your actors if they insist on doing it. A lot of the time you'll obviously have a stunt person that will do it, but sometimes there's actors that want to do it, but there's only so many of them can look that great and look like they're professional at what they're doing within like 3 or 4 months. So you have to be clever.
Also, you don't want to actually injure
people
that you're working
that's the
with.
other danger. So you had Pat E. Johnson in charge of choreography. You had Fumio Demura, who was a famous karate master. He taught Bruce Lee nunchucks and stuff. So he played Miyagi's part. So anytime Pat Morita was doing some combat, it was Fumio Demura.
Well, I thought Pat had just whipped it out of the bag a couple of minutes to go.
I think Fumio Demura, the part of Miyagi was kind of a wee bit based on him as well. They're very, very similar, especially like stature and all that. He looks like, we see Fumio Demura, he looks like that. He's that height and shape and all that kind of stuff, and you could believe it doesn't facially look like Pat Morita, but you could see all that bodily and the way he moves and stuff like that. So it worked perfectly. That wasn't an obviously taller guy or an obviously more muscular person. It fit that mold really well. You can see there's a bit of a goof in it where you can see that he's wearing a skull cap. But the sequence is shot at night. It's that sequence where
with the
skeletons. The Jack Skellingtons. You can see that he's wearing a skull cap. That it's not,
I didn't even notice.
Not actually Miyagi.
So...
If you're looking for it, you'll see it. But it's not terrible. You would get away with it. I mean, I didn't see it for years until, again, you look at it more critically and you go,
you
actually...
do like observing a hairline.
I love it, yeah. So it's like noticing those wigs. I love it. So he's got a heavy wig right on. But yeah, the action choreography is fantastic in general. All of the principal actors that do martial arts movements look fantastic, and especially Ralph Macchio, simply because he had no background whatsoever. And they were quite clever. They didn't have him doing... Kicks are generally where you can spot somebody who doesn't know martial arts or karate, because kicking's like a very difficult skill to make look good, especially on camera.
It's that kata right.
You can like learn kata in a school or whatever, but to do it on camera to make it look like convincing, because everything has to be bigger, more flamboyant, all that kind of stuff. So you have to really know it well in order to sort of act it if you're not going to be actually hitting a target, because it's not practical anymore. It's more about show. So it takes really good martial artists to make that look good. So I think they were clever in that they didn't have him kicking very much. like Miyagi-Do karate looked pretty much like punches and blocks.
Yeah. Well, just
'cause
depends.
he never actually teaches him any kicks in the film.
There's that single.
There's the crane kick, right? Which
Does
is
he
obviously
actually teach him that?
It doesn't really teach him it though. That's the thing. Daniel picks it up from watching him. He never actually teaches him it.
Interesting.
And as I said, it's mostly punches and blocks. But he uses the odd kick, but you could probably say he learned that from the book, and he had some classes at the Y, as he says. So that's maybe where he's learned how to kick a little bit. But what Miyagi has taught him is essentially how to move out of the way. Redistribute your weight, move out of the way, see something coming, and then use whatever technique you're going to use. So he doesn't have to be necessarily great at it. He just has to hit the target, which he does, which is great.
Punch! Drive a punch! Not just arm, whole body!
What's been battering through my head since we watched the film again last night is, of course, Bananaramas. It's a cruel summer.
That is a banger.
That is an 80s hit, if ever I've heard one. And the soundtrack for this film is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's, again, classic 80s soundtrack. We talked about earlier about how all of the songs are kind of thematic in some way. Like You're the Best Around. Well, they're trying to become the best around. But yeah, you've got Cruel Summer, and you've got them at the arcades and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it all sort of really fits. I can't remember the name of the song that's in that section at golf and stuff. I
wanted to go to golf and stuff so badly,
golf and stuff
though.
looks amazing, doesn't it?
Looks so
it's got
much fun.
all the stuff. That hockey game looks like the best thing ever.
I know.
The list of songs on it was really well chosen. And again, very, very similar to Rocky. They boost the atmosphere of the moment, by being thematic. They're giving you lyrics that reflect what's going on screen.
Make a perfect picture.
How do I know if my picture's the right one?
If come from inside you, always right on.
So are there any specific themes or messages that you can take away from The Karate Kid? I think there's personally quite a few.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot. One that stands out for me is about building discipline and about the power of repetition. And I think that's something, especially nowadays, that's really coming. It's something, that in Japanese culture that's very prevalent in training techniques and things like that. And I think, exactly, that repetitive practice. And I think with things like, the 10,000 hours concept, it's something that's coming more to the forefront in Western culture as well. This idea that honing your craft by putting in the time and putting in practice with intent has been really, really important. And I love the fact that Miyagi uses motions that aren't necessarily, he doesn't say, okay, I want you to block up and down for 10 hours. He uses a motion that he's maybe a little bit more familiar with, and he uses that to train that technique. And this idea that you don't necessarily build those skills in the dojo. You can hone them in the dojo, but if you want to really master a technique, then you have to look at it not just in that teaching space, but look for the training opportunities in everyday life as well. Yeah,
application of the technique to sort of reinforce it. And you can then approach it from a different perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think, as you said, it's about, that whole idea is just about strong fundamentals. Having more techniques and having being more creative and doing different things with it is great, but you have to have the foundations first before you move on. Nobody's saying that you should only stick. Personally, don't like it when people only stick with basics all the time. Because they feel like, you must always just do basic. I understand that concept, and mastering those basics and fundamentals and getting them right is good. But then it's okay to then be creative and then start to break the rules when you understand them. That's the base. But this is Daniel in a position where he's never done this before. So he needs repetition of basics for a long time until he's comfortable, because he's basically trying to get to a professional level
in 3 months.
To compete, in almost like an elite class for his age group and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of unlikely, but in this instance, it seems quite possible because of the amount of time he spends on it, and simply because he doesn't have 100 different things to learn. He's got 10 things to learn and be really good at.
Exactly.
And that's going to be his toolbox that he's going to sort of draw upon. And he'll always remember that, he'll always remember that. Another thing that stood out to me, I don't know if I'm reading far too much into it or not, but it did, I've touched upon it a little bit earlier, and that's about the immigrant story, about somebody coming to essentially a foreign land, Great Blue Yonder, this place where all the opportunities are going to be. I think when a lot of people came to America, that was the idea, that they were going to this land of riches, the land of milk and honey, where, you know, the American
Streets
dream
were paved with gold.
Yeah, the American dream was available to everyone, and you could just, if you got in, you worked hard, kept your head down, you know, you could achieve anything, and you could be living the life of Riley, you know. I think there's a little bit of an aspect of that, where they've got this arduous journey across country, you know, where they have to like get out and reset the car and all that kind of stuff and push it, and it's really, really challenging. And when they arrive, I thought it was really funny that Daniel's mum says, you know, let's get this ship unloaded
Before it sinks.
Yeah. You know, so it's almost like it was that idea that they'd landed. We've landed, we're finally here, we've finished the journey. This is it. This is where the new world is. This is where the, you know,
the promised land.
The promised land is here. And you quite quickly see that it's not all it was cracked up to be. There is work to be done. It's not to say you can't. The opportunity does still exist. It's just that there's going to be a hell of a lot of hard work against you. You're not just going to fall, as she says, fall into the swimming pool. You know, you have to like knuckle down and work hard. And that's ultimately what Daniel does. You know, he tries his best to be part of the local community, but again, like all immigrant stories, he finds pushback
from the locals.
The locals don't like him. They take a dislike to him. He's an outsider. There's somebody, it's funny again that the first person he connects with in the film is another, you know, the guy's name's Fernandez, you know, so you read into it and say that maybe he's from a Mexican family or a Spanish family or something, you know. The first person he connects with, it's maybe a son of an immigrant, you know, so it wasn't just like a white American that was the first person. So that normally happens in an immigrant story. You know, you'll go to a place where you feel safe because you're surrounded by people from your culture or from your country, and that's where you start. You don't just move straight into a white neighbourhood or whatever, you know, whatever neighbourhood, a black neighbourhood or whatever if you're white. You just walk straight in there because it would be hard to be accepted. It's just the way things go generally. You know, we'd love the world to be a nicer place where people could go wherever they want to go and be accepted.
But it's easier, I think, when you're in a strange place to be surrounded by people you're more familiar with. I guess.
This idea of an immigrant story is quite strong in that. I don't know if I'm reading a bit too much in that. It might not be what he was going for, but again on this rewatch I noticed that, and I think it was the line with her saying about the ship, let's unload it before it sinks, that really kind of sealed it for me, that I thought there must be something in here that's in the thinking.
I think there's a bit of a message in there for teachers or people who are role models as well, about, you know, being careful about the path in which you set your students on. I think that's very important, and you know, it plays out in the story of Kreese and Miyagi like quite obviously. Especially younger teenagers are more impressionable, and whatever you say and do and ask them to do, if they think it's cool, they're going to continue to do that, even though morally it might be really questionable, might not be the right thing. There's a huge responsibility on people who teach others, especially the young, to put them on the right path. And as you said, try to give them the best start. Exactly. Keep their moral compass
straight.
Yep.
Pointed ever north. The other message that stands out quite clearly to me as well is about balance in a number of forms. So mental, physical and spiritual balance, and how Miyagi teaches him those ways to sort of control his life. You know, if you get balance in those three areas, then you can have a good life, essentially, you know. So he has to get his relationship in order, has to get his mind in order, and has to get his body in order, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that was really important and really nicely worked throughout the movie as well.
Yep, definitely a good life message, and probably a good one for us as we enter wave 2 of the pandemic at the moment. It's probably quite a good thing for us to all bear in mind.
It's really hard to find balance in situations like this, you know, where everything seems quite negative. But again, just like Daniel's story, there seemed to be like heavily weighted in the negative, and then, you know, there's a spark and he eventually finds his centre. Now, quite literally finds his centre through Miyagi's teaching and just listening and learning and, you know, taking it all in. And
there's an opportunity for us to do a lot of repetitive practice as well when we do mask on, mask off.
That's right.
So I'm so sorry.
That's a fantastic
that just came
joke
to me. Feel free to use that, guys.
Mask on, mask off.
Show me paint the fence. Up, down. Up, down. Up, down. Other side. Look, eye. Always look, eye.
So what's your most memorable moment in The Karate Kid?
I think it's got to be, we spoke about it before, the moment when the penny drops, it all comes together. And my other one, it's not the most memorable, but I think one that's very important is that point when he's giving him the message about the bonsai, and he says, how do I know that my picture's right.
It's
I really
funny.
love that.
It's funny, isn't it? Because as you get older, like when I was younger, I would probably have said the crane kick, because it's like the crescendo of the film. It's like it punctuates the whole film. It's like a full stop, like boom, as soon as it hits his chin, it's just like, that's it, it's done, job done. But over time, with age, a bit of perspective, and you start to see the power of those moments. I think the penny drop moment is my favourite. It's his face that sells it. You can see that he's actually angry. And really going for it, and that's how Daniel's maybe even more surprised. It's like, I just blocked everything he threw at me, you know, and he's so shocked. It's just a wonderful moment, and again, it's like kind of, it encapsulates that first half of the film about what he's learned and how far he's come, and that's the point where he's over the threshold now into, I can do this, it's my time, I can actually go ahead and beat this guy.
And I think it says a lot as well that a more mature person with some life experience going back and watching that, sees the power in those moments.
That's
whereas 16-year-old Daniel LaRusso doesn't see it at the time.
It's clever writing. I think at the base of it, you've got a film that's ostensibly for children or for kids, maybe even young teenagers, but there's plenty in there for adults to take away from it as well. So that's the mark of any great writing, any great directing, is that it's got that power that it never kind of grows old. This film has like very universal concepts and very universal ideas. Again, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, that idea is, you know, you can't go wrong. Like, it's been told so many times, and it could be considered a little bit passé, like, oh, here we go again. But there's a reason why those stories work. And they always work, because it's universal. Every country in the world can understand it. Every person can understand it. You don't need to even understand what they're saying. You can see the progression of events, and
through the power of 80s music.
Interpretive dance. But yeah, it's a universal language, that universal language of cinema, and that message is universal as well. So.
Yeah.
Well, look who we have here, fellas. Our little friend Danielle. Hello, Danielle. What's the matter? Mommy not here to dress you?
What's your favourite quote?
I would like to say something profound.
I know, right?
But I'm going to say, get him a body bag, yeah!
He really reminds me of, You're so cool, Brewster!
That's exactly what he's like. Yeah, it's Tommy in the background. I don't know why, that thing's just funny. I always love it. And every time I think of Karate Kid, it's always that line that pops into my head. That and Sweep the Leg.
Yeah.
I love that. Those two. Really childish and callous. But I love them. For all of Miyagi's great wee speeches and koans. Yeah, I would rather just say that. Actually, funnily enough, I watched a UFC once where the guy was called Johnny the fighter, and somebody just kept shouting, "Sweep the leg, Johnny, sweep the leg." It's the best thing I've ever heard. This guy was right at the front of the cage, just going, "Sweep the leg, Johnny, sweep the leg."
That's brilliant.
Oh, God. Why the guy didn't just bust into laughing, I don't know. Do you have a favourite quote?
I think, again, I spoke about how do I know that my picture's the right one, and I think from a kind of
great.
spiritual sense, that's my favourite.
Yeah.
But you cannot argue with strike first, strike hard, no mercy.
Sir. Yeah, that's fantastic as well.
It's just such a good villain story, I think.
Yeah, it gets right to
really
the point as well, like simple phrases.
I mean, a villain with a motto, you can't really
exactly.
much better than that.
Get him a body bag! Yeah!
So finally, who is the star of the show in The Karate Kid for you? Who is the best performer?
Well, I think in this one it is a toss-up, but I think my money lands on Daniel LaRusso.
Yeah, Ralph Macchio. I would say so as well. It's very close, but I just think Miyagi is not in it enough. Like, Pat Morita's brilliant in it, but I don't think he's in it enough to warrant like best performance. I think it's very clearly Ralph Macchio's film. Like, again, he's one of those ones where he's in almost every frame. If not, I think it might be.
I
can't really recall it anybody's not.
I was trying to think that if it was actually like if he was in every scene, because I was trying to think if this story was definitely told from his perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. He's great in it. The moments where he has that argument with his mum after he gets beaten up, he falls off his bike, he has that argument, and he just says he wants to go home, he hates it here. There's a lot of power in that, and you can see like he's a young guy as well, maybe he's experienced those things himself, but he really did that brilliantly. You can see the rage in him, and I love the way he's so quick to anger. Like
it's like the final straw.
Yeah, like Miyagi's his friend, like, and he's just helped him up and stuff, and then when he says, "Oh, I'm not going to get involved," he just turns it. It's like, "Oh, well, that's it. He's going to leave me out here. We'll see you later then." I like that because it really has that stroppy teenager vibe to it. And again, we talked a little bit how development works throughout the course of the film, where, you know, his frustrations and all these kind of things are about can't do, won't do, blah, 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 everything's really negative, and eventually that becomes I could do, I was going to do
this.
But, so I think his character shows great development. That's obviously down to the writing, but you can see it in his manner.
Yeah.
You know, he becomes a bit more, becomes a little bit taller, a little bit wider, all that kind of thing. He just looks more comfortable and confident. And you can see that he reins in his frustration and his anger a little bit and learns how to channel it. Again, that's all down to the teaching of Miyagi. He learns how to channel it properly. And I think there's another point in the film where he talks about channeling all his power through 1 inch on his knuckles. I think that's like a larger, maybe a metaphor for him channeling his anger and his rage into that one point, and there's great power in that if you can do that, if you can have a central point of focus. But yeah, I think Ralph Macchio is definitely the best in the film.
Alright, watch this. Hey guys, how you doing? It's good to see you. Hey, sorry about the eye there, Johnny. Shoulder okay, Tommy? You guys be careful not to go stepping in front of any more buses now, alright?
Now, Karate Kid's obviously had a bit of a resurgence recently. In the last couple of years since Cobra Kai was released first on YouTube.
Yeah, that's right. It was a YouTube series, and then Netflix bought it. I think with the it was huge on.
Yeah,
it was YouTube Red, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, they Netflix actually then bought it, and they've since had a second series, and the third one has just been released recently. We just finished the third one. Yeah, we finished all of them. So it's an amazing series. It takes what the original films did, mostly the first one, but it's actually using elements from the second film and possibly even the third one as well now. So it plays with your expectations. It sort of rubs, it sort of pokes fun a little bit at the aspects of the 80s that don't really work anymore.
It's really nicely done.
It's really nicely done. So it takes the piss a little bit, but also it reveres and respects where it came from. You know, I think I made the comment online about honouring the past, living in the present, and hoping for the future. That's exactly what that show has got. Yeah. You know, there's clear respect for the source material and the characters. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it in the first place.
Exactly.
But you live in the present, so you say that doesn't work anymore. This works. You know, the dojos are filled with women and men, boys and girls. You know, that kind of thing. You can't just get away with punching people anymore. There's lawsuits and
these things are like literally said out loud, which is really nice.
Exactly.
And another thing that's lovely about it is it does a kind of Wicked for what Wicked did for the Wizard of Oz, where it shows you it from another perspective.
Exactly.
And I think we won't go into too much detail because if you haven't seen that series and you're a fan of the original Karate Kid franchise, you should definitely check that out. Yeah,
essentially it just posits the idea of the villain, like who actually was the villain. Was it Johnny or was it Daniel? You know, and it plays around with that really well. It goes in a lot of different directions with it, but it's a great series. Really well made, and it's great to see all the original cast actually back doing stuff as well. I don't think you could have replaced them. So that about wraps up our first episode of 2021. We've just popped our 21 cherry with the Karate Kid. Sorry.
We're legal now.
Yes. We're trying to get back to our regular weekly schedule, so we're going to try and do that over the course of the next few weeks and months.
Obviously in 2021 styly, we will be doing it all in pyjamas.
Absolutely. Yeah, so again, we're all back in lockdown, so it's a good time as any.
Athletic wear and pyjamas.
And it's as good a time as any to be watching films and talking about them. So yeah, we'll try to get back to our regular schedule, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Just search for @Deckard Unicorn. We've also got the YouTube channel, same again, Deckard Unicorn. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're hearing this podcast, you can go back and check out all of our other episodes in the archive.
If you enjoy any of these episodes, please consider subscribing, and if you could leave us a positive review, that would be awesome. So until next time, stay safe, take care.
No mercy, sir. Sorry. Had to get that one in there.